Yeah.
Good morning. As usual, I find myself saying good morning to those of you who join us now. If you are joining us from a cubbyhole at 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's the only time you've got, or because you've been woken up, hello to you and thank you for joining us. So we are once again on a Facebook Live with Family Voice. And before I introduce Emma from Learning Space, I suppose I just wanted to do a quick reminder of why we're here and what we're trying to do at Family Voice with these sessions. As the Parent Carer Forum, we're in a rather unique position where we are able to talk to service providers like Emma or council officers. You will have seen some of our conversations with, for example, Eamon Gilbert the other week around the transport consultation. And it gives us the opportunity to allow parents, yourselves, to hear what they all have to say. So that's really the purpose here, and I'm really pleased. We've been talking over the last few months quite a lot about the new emotional wellbeing and mental health service in Surrey called MindWorks, and it's a big, huge, complicated beast of which Learning Space is a small, big part. So I think I'm going to, on that note, I'm going to stop talking for a little while and say, Emma, good morning. And
good morning, everyone.
Yourself, Learning Space, and how it fits into that little beast.
I'll try. I'm still trying to work that out myself. I'm Emma Tapley from Learning Space, and I'm the autism lead and the head of the neurodevelopmental team in Learning Space. I have to apologise for my hay fever eyes, so if I look cross-eyed, it's because I've got really bad hay fever at the moment. Apologies. So Learning Space has been going for 25 years, and we originally, it was a service that schools would buy us in, and we'd work with children on a one-to-one, sometimes small groups, and with families for any children who were struggling emotionally. So we work on self-esteem, emotional regulation, and I worked for Learning Space years ago for 4.5 years, then I left for 7 years, and I set up an autism division in a mainstream secondary academy. That's a long story. And then I've been back at Learning Space for 4.5 years as the autism lead. But when I came back, in that time we got the contract with what was CAMS then, SABP, and children who were referred to CAMS would be triaged, and lots of children come our way and still do. But we were getting more and more neurodiverse children, and I noticed that we were seeing lots of children with such a similar profile and lots of parents who were having the same story, and they were completely isolated. So we started to set up different groups, so parent group, understanding autism course, all sorts of different services. So we see a range. So Learning Space we still have the contract with schools. We've got the contract with MindWorks, and that is children who are referred to us through a one-to-one through CAMS, and we offer up to 10 one-to-one sessions based on anything that it's very child-centered and very child-led. Sometimes families are in those sessions as well. We liaise with schools, we work close, so we try and join up all those dots. We also have a contract to deliver autism training in schools across Surrey. So that's a huge task. So that's another part of our contract. But we also have a community mentor team that it's been going for a year, that's funded by MindWorks, and parents and families can self-refer to that service. So there are various different clubs, holiday activities, we've got a parent voice and a youth voice sort of forum as well. So quite a few strings to our bow at Learning Space, but it's evolved.
And what I'm hearing actually immediately is that even just your little part of the world is incredibly complicated. And I'm thinking, as a parent, the questions that I have in my head are, do you only work with children with autism now?
No, so Learning Space is open to all children. The neurodevelopmental team is any child with a neurodevelopmental need on their application form. And in fact, what my colleagues in the non-ND one-to-one team are finding, that so many children who were referred for anxiety, most of those children have got an ND need. A huge percentage of them have got undiagnosed autism.
So
we see a lot of.
Can I ask you about that? If you're referred to a child with an ND need, is that a child who has been diagnosed, or someone has said we think they have neurodevelopment?
Any question mark, whether they're waiting for an assessment, whether they're going to be assessed, any question mark of an ND need. And of course, there's a lot of co-concurring conditions with so many of the children we see. And we're seeing a huge increase in children with ADHD being referred. I mean, something like a 30-something% increase since COVID. And I strongly attribute it, and so does Bernardo's, who are, I think, talking with you next week, aren't they?
Yes.
To what's happened in schools, and COVID hasn't helped, but this absolute huge emphasis on academic attainment and sitting in your seat and not moving, and extended hours. I mean, this new green paper for extended hours in schools fills me with horror. And we have seen a huge increase in children with ADHD who were previously managing, who are now not managing. So that says something, that there's something going on other than COVID.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because with that refers to a real contradiction, it seems, in schools culture being pressured presumably from central government, in that, as you say, the academic attainment and what feels like a very Victorian approach to school.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, we hear about the importance of being child-centered and inclusive. Yeah. And a child with ADHD is not being included if they're being forced to sit still.
Yeah, absolutely. And children, we hear this day in, day out, children are being sanctioned and punished for their neurodiverse behaviours. So poor impulse control, most schools have these behaviour codes. So if you shout out, that's a mark. And of course, if you've got poor impulse control, which many neurodiverse children have, and they might be really focused, they might be enjoying the lesson and really engaged, but they call the answer out instead of putting their hand up. That's a behaviour point, and that accumulates. Then they're excluded from things, then they've got detentions, and that it's that sort of rigid thinking of not getting it. We've got to treat all children the same. No, you haven't. But this is the message we are trying to get into schools with our schools training.
That's what I was wondering, because to me, this leads back to Learning Space have a contract with schools. How much, I suppose, is that reliant on the schools coming to you and asking for it? Or because I wonder how do we reach the schools that are really struggling?
Absolutely.
And don't they have a problem?
It's the schools, it's the schools who really need the training who are the hardest to reach. And it's the staff within those schools that really need it the most, are going to be the least likely to actually engage with the training. And because time's so limited with this, it's a small part of what we do. And in lockdown, I turned our face-to-face parent course into a Zoom course, which actually didn't work nearly as well. So then I thought, we're better off. So then I made a video for parents and a booklet with everything so that they could watch it at their own pace and reflect and process. And then parents sign up for a question and answer session, which is much more effective. So we decided to do the same for schools, so that we really encourage, when a school signs up, for them to send it to all staff and to make sure that all staff have watched and listened to it. And it's a fine line with how much information to put in, but the whole focus of my video is, please be explaining why these behaviours happen, explaining about sensory needs, and actually pointing out the behaviours and saying, what are you sanctioning here? Is this willful, deliberate, disruptive behaviour, or is it because of their autism or their ADHD? So it's early days. We've had some schools, when we hear from parents through our sessions that some difficulties with schools, I try and approach those schools. Some have come on board, most haven't. Some schools, it's actually really hard to get hold of them. You can't even email them. You have to fill a form in for them to contact you. So actually reaching some schools has been quite difficult. But we've had good feedback from the schools that we have worked with, and once we've got a relationship, we've offered to go in and talk to them. So it's really building bridges and trying to join up all those dots that it seems like there's so many little bits of things going on and lots of great things on paper that just isn't being rolled out. It's just not being rolled out.
Yeah. So. And there is that contradiction, isn't there, when if a school is being told they have to have a strict behaviour policy from the one side, and parents and people like yourselves and actually a lot of the Surrey officers that I hear are telling you have to be inclusive. These children have different needs, different ways of expressing their emotions, their information. I can imagine that as a school, you kind of go, okay, so which master do I serve today?
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what, Ofsted are judging on behaviour, which is everybody looking in at behaviour in exactly the same way and looking the same with their smart, you know, their uniform, which we'll know is a sensory nightmare. And their EBAC results. You know, schools are all about their English, math, science, a language, and humanities. And when we approach schools and say this child's not managing, can they drop a language? We get, well, no, because it's going to affect our figures, and this is our school's reputation, and they're capable of it because they, you know, they're high, you know, their academic level, so they can do it, but they're not understanding that absolute, you know, burnout and energy accounting and the need to do less, you know, that how much getting through a school day, you know, absolutely wears children out with the I find this really interesting because one of the big strategic level conversations that we have a lot that's with Surrey and with health partners is this need for us in the SEND world to be one whole system that includes the local authority and health and the voluntary sector and schools, obviously. And it's in theory, it all sounds like it's very unified, and actually on the ground there are still these tensions, and as you say, at the end of the day, the person that suffers from the lack of that one joined up thinking is the child who's struggling. Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen this pattern for years. You know, we get children who are referred to us for anxiety. They might have done the autism questionnaires, but didn't score highly enough. So, you know, we do sessions with them, and actually in Learning Space, we're lucky enough, we can just refer them straight back in. And we've been told that if we ask for an autism assessment, they do it. They don't question it now.
Right.
And the number of children we've seen who we refer back in, who then do get a diagnosis, but by the time they've fought for a diagnosis, then they fight for an EHCP and have to appeal that. Then they go down the mainstream route. And some of these children we see become really unwell because of this struggle. And we can see it coming. We can see how easily it would have been to prevent that. And unfortunately, that's not getting any better. I mean, we as Learning Space have written lots of case studies to present and say, you know, this is the difficulty. So they're looking at it, and they want, you know, there's a will to make it better, and they're looking at ways to make it better. And they're bringing in different departments. There's a new key working sort of department coming in to try and link together. And I suggested in that meeting that if they have a key worker, can they not just be in an office space? Can those key workers be based across all our organisations so they get to know them fluently? They live and breathe it, and feed it back, so they can really have a picture of the whole system, because that seems to be what's lacking at the moment. And there's lots of people with very good intentions, doing lots of good things, but no one overseeing and joining the dots. But I feel very strongly that what's happening in education is having a huge impact. I think if we don't tackle that, you know, we're sweeping water uphill, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask, in that whole kind of people talking to each other, one of the things that I wanted us to have a little bit of a talk about, if that's okay, is you at Learning Space are an important part of this MindWorks system. We know that, so we understand that if, for example, I have a child with anxiety, I might go to my school or my GP, and they can then refer my child to Learning Space. Is that right?
Yes, but through MindWorks, through CAMS.
MindWorks. Yeah. Okay, so MindWorks will kind of make we think Learning Space is the right.
Yeah, but service. You can also request Learning Space. You can actually put a request, and you can say Learning Space ND team and the Understanding Parent course. Great. And once families are in our system, we can then re-refer them, or we can refer them to other organisations.
That's the bit that I wanted to ask you a little bit about. So because as a parent, are you likely to speak to anybody before your child gets referred to Learning Space, if that's the right person? Do you know?
No, because we don't know who's coming. We have got people on our team who are trying to triage with access and advice. You know, the people who triage at CAMS at Mindworks. But then they come to, and there's about a 5-month waiting list at the moment. It's because we know we're going as fast as we can, but there's a wait. So the first, we do get someone from our admin team to acknowledge and say, you're on our waiting list. We'll explain the situation and what will happen. But then once a child is allocated to a practitioner, then the practitioner, does a lengthy phone call.
Great.
And talks about the service.
And then, as you say, if you have that one-to-one, you mentioned a 10 sessions, presumably weekly.
Yes. Yeah. Weekly. Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that, because a lot of worries that parents have when they've got particularly a child with anxiety or with neurodevelopmental needs, the idea of having a time-bound intervention is really frightening, because it might take that child 9 weeks to trust you enough to talk to you.
Well, it used to be 6 weeks, so we fought for it to be 10 weeks for that very reason. And we very often refer for another round, and we've got parent drop-in and sort of clubs as well. So there's other things that we can offer
Great.
As well. But I think because we were Learning Space was traditionally a brief solution focused sort of approach. We're not slaves to it by any means, but and we're very much a multidisciplinary team. We've got people from an education background, occupational therapy, social work, art therapy, psychotherapists, counsellors, drama therapists. We've got whole. So actually, we can look at a child and say that this practitioner has got the relevant strengths to work with this child, and also when we re-refer, we think someone with an occupational therapy background would be really good with this child. So we've got that ability within our team. But that time bond thing is really difficult, because a lot of parents feel they drop off a cliff. So, which is why we've got our community mentor team as well. Sometimes we can say, okay, we're finishing sessions, but then a community mentor will then go and work with that child, and it's less time bound. And obviously it can't be completely ongoing. But then it's hopefully some of our clubs and parent voice, youth voice, some of those things are ongoing. But there's a massive gap for a service offering sort of more intensive intervention that is ongoing. We get lots of parents saying, what can I do? This needs to be ongoing, and can we pay you? Sorry, can't we? None of us have got time, and it wouldn't be professional if we took on private clients as well. So it's then finding a private therapist, which is not easy, and it's expensive. So there is a gap in that provision. There really is.
It's really interesting, because that for me leads to that notion where for a long time, and it's been really interesting in your take on this. People who are listening to me may know that I have 2 of my 3 children are autistic, have suffered from very significant anxiety and depression and various other issues. But for years, the response when we tried to get help was, well, they're autistic. What do you expect? You're supposed to be anxious if you're autistic. But I don't accept that. Actually, I think there is no world in which I can say to my daughter, oh, you threw up because you have to leave the house. That's fine. It's just because you're autistic. And as you say, there are the world that we ask our children to live in and work in isn't suitable to their needs a lot of the time, which means that we have to.
Torturous.
It's torturous. You're absolutely right.
Really.
Yeah. And so the only way we could change that, couldn't we? But at the moment, the way that we are looking at it is bolting on additional support. But as you say, if the problem comes from an environment that makes you ill, then a short-term intervention isn't going to work.
It's sweeping water uphill again, isn't it? And I mean, yes, we need to change that. But first of all, we need to understand that society, and we need to understand why it's difficult. And there's Kieran Rose, who I was talking to earlier about, Benedict, it talks about double empathy, that people say people with autism haven't got empathy. Actually, society has no empathy for people with autism.
Absolutely.
And we need to fix that before we can change. There needs to be the understanding rather than snap out of it, this mentality that, come on, just try harder. You could do it yesterday, you can do it today. And it's good for you. You need to be out in the playground making friends, you know, you need to learn to sorry, I've got Tui trying to sell me something, go away. You know, you need to be able to learn to look people in the eye. You need to be the same as everybody else. And until we can get that message across that, no, you don't. And even a lot of the ELSA programs in schools, the emotional literacy programs, they're aimed at sort of normalizing children, sort of teaching them eye contact and role play, and this is how you should behave. You know, this is constant negative narrative for people with autism, all their and other neurodivergent sort of conditions, that actually they're wrong and they need to change to be the same as everybody else. And no wonder people are anxious. If you grow up with that message day in, day out, and not only that, has been punished for that, and then you're exhausted, then you need to hide why you're exhausted, because no one understands that you're exhausted from just getting up and getting your horrible school uniform on. And there's just not the understanding, and we're miles away from that.
And what I find really interesting in talking to you, Emma, is that you reflect what certainly my experience as a parent and what I hear from families all the time, and of this, we are living in an imperfect world, feels like, and you know, it's a really, really difficult world that we are trying to support our children to live in, and ourselves as carers, because we are navigating it with them.
And there's this culture of blame as well, and we're seeing a lot of that culture of blame from schools to parents, and then the whole culture of blame just gets bigger and bigger, and it gets very acrimonious and very toxic.
Yeah, and at the same time, we have people like yourself who are still working on a daily basis, trying to help children, and I think that's one of the things that I'm really quite passionate about. Is it comes, I suppose, for me under the banner of kindness, but I feel that there's a real imperative for us to find hope where we can, because if there wasn't hope, we would just down tools and stop, wouldn't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I hear from you is this beautiful combination of, you see it exactly as our families are experiencing it, and it's hard and it's painful, as you used the word torturous earlier, and most parents go, yes, my child goes to school and it is torture, and yet
children get through the day at school. It's a miracle.
And at the same time, we have these messages from government, from Senkos, from everywhere, that says school is the safest place for a child. Our families are looking at us going, well, but it isn't. It absolutely is.
If only there was more sort of acceptance of, my child can only go part-time, and some schools say yes, but only for 4 weeks. You know,
exactly.
They've got to know, and then if a child is part-time, they've got this pressure of, okay, I've got to be able to manage this in 4 weeks' time, and of course that makes them more anxious, and it's not helpful at all. Some schools are more flexible, but it's just there's no sort of standard gold standard.
And my understanding is those schools that are flexible are doing it under the shadow of, they are going to be told off by other parts of the system, aren't they?
And they will be.
They will be. So I mean, for me, it is, there's a combination, isn't there, of you get it, and that for families is crucial. At the same time, you're finding ways to help, and I'm really interested. I suppose it would be really interesting, maybe in a year or two, to revisit and say, well, how's that schools training part of your contract going? Are you beginning to feel that the schools are beginning to understand? Are they beginning to be able to change? Have they been allowed to make some of those? What are reasonable adjustments?
And interesting you say that. So some of the comments we've had from staff who've attended, we've had a head of languages, and we said, well, do they, you know, talking about all these difficulties that children have in the language sessions, well, do they have to go to do they have to go? Can they not do something that's more helpful for them? Catch up with homework or nothing for a bit? And it's sort of, no, I've tried that. I'm not allowed. They have to. It's rigid. It's set.
It is rigid. I remember a very, very long time ago, about 25 million years ago, I used to be a music teacher. The school system was quite different then, But I remember one particular student I had she was lovely. She was in mainstream only because her parents had absolutely insisted. And I was a music teacher, and in all of my meetings with the Senko, I was saying, but she's delightful, she's lovely, but she would be far better served by some support with living skills than being in my music lesson.
There's no life skills taught in schools. No. Nothing. I mean, for all children need that. I remember my own sons when they were at school saying, why are we doing algebra? Why can't we learn about mortgages and tax and insurance? I want to know how that works. Sure. Yeah. But, specialist provisions do teach that, key skills and basic skills and life skills is so much more useful than Shakespeare and algebra. If you want to study Shakespeare and algebra, fair enough, but it shouldn't be standard, at the exclusion of the life skills.
And I think it's that individualization, isn't it? The other thing, as you were talking, that really struck me is I'm French, and when I had my children, they grew up bilingual. It wasn't difficult. They found it very easy until they hit going into the community. And I didn't know at the time that they were autistic, but what I realized was that they were struggling with communication, particularly around emotion. And we had to stop the French. It was too much. They were choosing to communicate in English, and that was far more important. Now, they wish they remembered their French, but it was am I going to, does French matter, or does their emotional literacy?
Yeah. Was it overload, too much? Yeah.
Too much. And it was when you have a little 6-year-old who is finally beginning to be able to communicate about emotion, but choosing to do it in English, well, you don't respond in French, do you? And I was the French speaker in the family, so it was a choice that was made slowly. But it is about, what does my child need? Do they objectively, would I like my children to be bilingual? Yes, it's a really useful skill. I use languages all the time. It's not part of my job. It's just there's something that is really useful. But
and that's probably how your brain's probably very good at that. I think to be good at languages, it's not just down to work and
absolutely. There's a whole thing.
Some people have got that ear and some people haven't.
But for my kids, it was an additional pressure that they absolutely didn't need.
Yeah.
And that's what the school system is struggling, failing to acknowledge, that different children have different needs, abilities, and actually if you end up focusing on the area that they really struggle with, you don't allow them to shine where they are able.
Yeah. I heard it said recently that actually a lot of people with autism are more suited to doing a PhD than 10 GCSEs, and it's that monotropic thinking that special interests, but they never prefer to call it monotropic thinking, which is it's a nice, just that absolute skill to really look at a subject in detail. Rather than school is so general, isn't it? It's so general.
It's general and it's standardized.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the pressures of school, it's sort of society, but Surrey in particular, that sort of gold standard child you have to have. They have to be, speaking another language, definitely, be able to play an instrument, be brilliant at all sports, be able to swim, be great on stage, be social at parties. This is this gold standard Surrey child that everybody's seems to be aspiring to. And a lot of parents who come to the parent course, they say, but I'm trying to get them to clubs, so I don't want them to miss out. And we said, well, do they want to go to the clubs? Is it them who want to go, or is it you want them to go? And they've said, no, they don't want to go. Sort of take the pressure off then, don't we do. I'm not saying with my children, I was sort of forcing my completely non-sporty younger child to try football, try swimming, try tennis. He hated it.
Maybe today's top tip is if your child doesn't want to go to a club, leave them alone.
Yes, be kind to yourself, be kind to your child. Yeah, yeah.
I'm aware of the time, Emma. It's been a real delight to speak to you. If I can make sure that I've got the links to Learning Space and what you do on there, I hope that for parents, I know we've had some absolutely amazing feedback from parents who've used Learning Space.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been, you know, overall, I think the things that parents find frustrating, it won't surprise you, it will be the wait and the fact that sessions which are really helpful come to an end.
Yeah, and we're desperately trying to put more things in place to address that, but and we're doing things that we're not funded for, and not, you know, we can't claim, you know, add to our data. A lot of our clubs and extra activities we're doing because we're trying to fit them in around our contract, because there's such a need for it.
And I think that may be in looking at MindWorks and the way that this new contract includes so many voluntary sector organisations, I wonder whether it's a huge strength, although potentially, I mean, there are issues, but actually the voluntary sector is so good at saying, right, this contract bit isn't enough. What can we do to help? And I hope, you know, I really hope that, first of all, that we've maybe reassured parents who are waiting to meet Learning Space for the first time, that they've now seen that human face of who you are. And also, if you contact us, that someone will always get back to you. You know, we will always get back to parents, and we do, you know, any queries, we're there. So. And what we will do is if I can put the link on so that parents can have a better understanding that there is some part of your work that parents can't refer themselves or their child to, but there are bits that they can.
Yes, our community mentor team have got all sorts going on. So they've got activities they run activities in the holidays. They've got some evening clubs. A whole range of things.
Lovely. And I suppose that the message that I would say is, if your child is having difficulties around emotional well-being, mental health, and you feel they need help, go and talk to your school. If your school isn't listening to you, go and talk to your GP and ask for a referral to MindWorks. If what you've heard here, mention Learning Space, and
a lot come our way anyway, whether you mention or not.
Yeah,
big chunk.
And I suppose that's the one kind of proactive thing that you can do as a parent in this space, and know that, as I say, if your GP isn't listening, go and talk to your school. If your school isn't listening, go and talk to your GP, and hopefully at least one of those will listen and get things moving.
If not, change GPs. Easier said than done, changing schools, I know.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Emma. It's been
really well, thank you. Yeah, I could talk on this subject for hours and hours and hours.
We could, couldn't we? But that we may start running out of time and getting, taking people's time too much. Thank you so much. I'm going to do the stopping of everything. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye, everybody. Bye.